My husband insisted I apologize to his female best friend because my honesty upset her feelings. All right, let me tell you about the day my world shattered, and then, piece by piece, I rebuilt it, stronger and truer than before. My husband, Mason, stood there, glaring at me, demanding I apologize to his best friend, Scarlett, because my honesty had, apparently, hurt her feelings. And when I refused, he snarled, "Apologize, or I'll divorce you." I agreed. I went to her house, looked her right in the eye, and in front of her husband, I said something that would make them both understand, in excruciating detail, why women like me never bow down for truth. "Apologize to Scarlett, or I'll divorce you." Can you believe that? My husband, Mason, stood in our living room, arms crossed, delivering this ultimatum like he was negotiating a business deal, not threatening to end our 5-year marriage. His face wore that familiar expression, the one that told me I was unreasonable, jealous, impossible. The one that, for months, had made me question my own sanity, even when my gut screamed I was right. I stared at him, this man I'd promised to love and cherish, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe, the chilling truth was, I'd never really known him at all. The Mason I thought I married wouldn't demand I apologize to his female best friend for the crime of simply noticing their inappropriate relationship. The Mason I thought I married wouldn't gaslight me into thinking I was the problem when his emotional affair with Scarlett Pierce had been happening right under my nose for years. "You want me to apologize to her?" I heard my own voice, calmer than the tempest raging inside me. "For what, exactly?" His voice rose with each accusation, like he was the victim. "For treating her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. For making her feel unwelcome in our lives. For being so jealous that you can't accept I have a meaningful friendship outside our marriage." He paused, his chest heaving. "Scarlett's been nothing but kind to you, and you've hurt her feelings with your constant attitude. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I don't know if I can stay in this marriage." Something shifted inside me in that moment. Not heartbreak, not yet. What I felt was clarity. Cold. Sharp. Like a blade. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I still believed in the life Mason and I were building. I'm Maria Montgomery, and for 5 glorious years, I genuinely thought I had a solid marriage. We met at a summer barbecue, one of those perfect July afternoons where everything feels possible. Mason, with his genuine smile, made me feel seen. He listened when I talked about my work as a graphic designer. He remembered the little things, my coffee order, my love for bookstores. He made me feel like he was truly interested in who I was, not who he wanted me to be. 2 years later, we had a small, meaningful wedding. Our 2-bedroom apartment felt like a real home. We cooked, we laughed, we talked about buying a house, having kids. Life felt stable, predictable, comfortable in all the ways I'd been taught to value. I thought I knew exactly who I'd married and what our future would look like. Looking back now, I realize I was living in a carefully constructed illusion, seeing only what Mason wanted me to see. The cracks started to show about 6 months into our marriage, when Mason came home glowing with excitement. Scarlett, his college best friend, was moving back to town. He described her with a nostalgic warmth that seemed innocent at first. Brilliant, charismatic, a tight group from college. I was happy for him. Everyone needs good friends. When I finally met Scarlett, she was exactly as Mason described. Polished, confident, attractive. But what really struck me was how easily she and Mason fell into an old rhythm. They laughed about professors I'd never met, reminisced about road trips I hadn't been on, finished each other's sentences. I sat there, smiling, nodding, but feeling like an observer. Their shared history created a language I didn't speak. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there too. A quiet man. At one point, our eyes met, and we shared a brief, knowing look. I didn't understand it then, but I would come to recognize it later, mutual acknowledgement of our secondary status. The small boundary violation started so subtly, I almost didn't notice. A few weeks after that dinner, Scarlett started texting Mason during our date nights. Movies, dinner, weekend plans, constantly interrupted. Each time, he'd apologize, promise to put the phone away, but it kept pulling his attention like a magnetic force. When I gently suggested he text her back later, Mason would look at me with barely concealed disappointment, as if I was failing some fundamental test of understanding. Then came the spare key incident. Mason gave Scarlett a key to our apartment without discussing it with me first. I walked out of my home office one Tuesday afternoon to find her sitting on our couch, shoes off, completely at home in my space, while Mason made her coffee. She needed our Wi-Fi. I felt like an intruder in my own living room. When she left, I tried to suggest boundaries, a simple text before dropping by. Mason's response was immediate and defensive. "Scarlett's going through a difficult transition," he explained. "Real friends show up without conditions. Are you really going to put convenience over compassion?" That conversation became a template. Every time I tried to set a boundary, Mason reframed it as me being unwelcoming, jealous, or insecure. I started second-guessing my own instincts. Maybe I was being possessive. Maybe this was what mature adult friendships looked like, and I was just too insecure to handle it. Our 5th anniversary arrived. I'd planned a perfect evening. An elegant restaurant, the emerald dress Mason loved, a walk along the Riverwalk, a leather-bound photo album of our life together. We were halfway through appetizers when Mason's phone started buzzing. Incessantly, each notification chipped away at his attention until he was barely present, his eyes glued to the screen. That's when I said, "Mason, it's our anniversary." He looked up, genuine confusion on his face. "Scarlett's having a crisis. I'm just letting her know she's not alone." But I was alone, sitting across from my husband at an expensive restaurant on what should have been one of our most important nights, while he provided emotional support to another woman. The irony was suffocating. That night, lying in bed beside Mason, I finally admitted the crushing truth. My marriage had 3 people in it, and I was the least important one. 3 months passed. 3 months of me trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Mason's relationship with Scarlett was just an unusually close friendship. My discomfort was my issue. 3 months of swallowing my instincts, forcing smiles while Scarlett continued to drop by unannounced, and Mason continued to prioritize her texts over our conversations. Then, one Wednesday morning in December, my laptop died. Right in the middle of a critical client project. The deadline was 6 hours away. Panic set in. Mason's laptop was in his home office. He told me countless times I could use it, that we had no secrets, what was his was mine. I grabbed it, logged into my cloud storage, and started working. An hour in, I needed to reference our tax documents. I opened his file explorer and navigated to his shared documents folder. That's when I saw it, buried among work files, in a way that suggested it was deliberately hidden, but not well enough. A folder labeled, ominously, personal_private. My stomach clenched. Mason and I didn't keep secrets. Or so I believed. My hands trembled as I moved the cursor. Part of me knew I should close the laptop and ask him later. Part of me desperately hoped for something innocent. I clicked it open. Hundreds of files, photos, screenshots, documents spanning 3 years. My eyes tried to make sense of what I was seeing before the emotional impact hit. Mason and Scarlett leaning in close at restaurant tables I didn't recognize. Candid shots of her laughing. Selfies of the 2 of them, his arm around her, smiling like they shared something precious and private. Then the screenshots. Dozens of text message conversations. I clicked the first one. 2 in the morning, 6 months ago. Scarlett. A long paragraph about feeling lost in her marriage, about missing connection. Mason's equally long response, validating every feeling, sharing his own thoughts about paths not taken, and connections that transcend normal friendship boundaries. Another screenshot, a year ago, late at night again. Scarlett wondering about different choices. Mason confessing his own what-ifs. My client deadline was completely forgotten. I sat frozen, clicking, watching a hidden relationship unfold in documented detail. These weren't casual friend check-ins. These were emotional confessions. Intimate, late-night conversations. Then I found the message. The one that would replay in my mind for months, burned into my memory like acid on glass. Scarlett, 2:17 a.m., 8 months ago. Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that? Mason's response came 3 minutes later, as if he'd been awake waiting. More than I probably should, but we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now. I read those words 5 times, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. But the meaning was crystal clear. My husband had feelings for Scarlett that went far beyond friendship. He'd been thinking about alternative lives where they were together, and he valued whatever this was enough to maintain it through years of secret communication. While I'd been sleeping next to him, worried about work or groceries, he'd been engaging in emotional intimacy with another woman. I couldn't stop myself now. The Pandora's box was open. I closed the screenshots and opened our joint credit card statements. Every Tuesday afternoon for the past 2 years, a charge at Riverbend Cafe, an upscale downtown bistro Mason had never suggested we visit together. $50 to $70. 2 people having a nice lunch. Mason's digital calendar confirmed it. Lunch meeting, a vague 2-hour block, every Tuesday at noon for years. The photos from his hidden folder matched perfectly. While I'd been working from home, eating leftovers, assuming my husband was grabbing a quick bite between meetings, he'd been having weekly secret lunch dates with Scarlett. Dates that required 2 full hours. Significant money. A pattern for years. This wasn't occasional. This was deliberate, sustained, carefully planned deception. Mason had been building a parallel emotional life with Scarlett. Standing dates, intimate late-night conversations, shared secrets, all while coming home to me and acting like everything was normal. I sat at that desk for 2 hours, my client presentation abandoned. I read every screenshot, documented every suspicious charge, studied every photo. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. It was years of documented emotional intimacy, financial proof of secret meetings, photographic evidence of a relationship that crossed every boundary a married person should respect. What made it worse was the sudden clarity of how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Every time I'd expressed discomfort, Mason had made me the problem. He called me jealous, possessive, insecure. He positioned himself as the patient, reasonable partner, trying to help his wife work through her unfounded suspicions. He'd made me question my own instincts until I believed my discomfort was a personal failing. But my instincts had been screaming the truth the entire time. Every uncomfortable feeling, every moment of suspicion, every time I felt like the third wheel in my own marriage, all of it was an accurate perception of a reality Mason was actively hiding from me while gaslighting me into thinking I was imagining problems that didn't exist. I finally understood why Mason defended Scarlett so fiercely, why he prioritized her texts, why he gave her a spare key without asking me, why he looked at me with disappointment whenever I suggested their friendship had unhealthy dynamics. Because in Mason's mind, I wasn't his priority. Scarlett was. I was the obligation, the legal wife, the person he came home to out of commitment, not choice. Scarlett was the person he carved out special time for every week, the person he shared his deepest feelings with. I had become the third wheel in my own marriage, and the evidence proving it was spread across Mason's laptop screen in undeniable detail. I sat at that desk, staring at the evidence of his betrayal, until the afternoon light faded. My client deadline had passed hours ago. My phone had buzzed multiple times with messages I didn't read. None of it mattered anymore compared to the wreckage of my marriage. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I found a USB drive and methodically copied everything. Every photo, every screenshot, every credit card statement. I organized it all, building a case like a lawyer preparing for trial. When I finished, I sat back. I expected tears, rage, and emotional collapse. Instead, I felt a strange, calm clarity. The kind that comes after shock wears off and you realize you're standing in wreckage that can't be rebuilt. There was almost relief in it, knowing I hadn't been crazy, knowing my instincts had been right all along. It was 3:45. Mason would be home around 6:30, expecting dinner and normal conversation. I decided to give him exactly that, at least at first. I wanted to see if he could sit across from me, pretending everything was fine, knowing what he'd been hiding. I went to the kitchen and started making chicken and roasted vegetables, one of his favorites. I set the table. I put on our favorite playlist, an illusion of normalcy in an apartment that suddenly felt like a stage set. Mason walked in at 6:02, right on schedule. He looked tired. He smiled when he saw me, kissed my cheek. "Something smells good," he said, heading to change. Rough day with that client presentation. My laptop had crashed a lifetime ago. He had no idea I'd spent the day discovering his emotional affair. You could say that, I replied, my voice steady. I let him decompress for 15 minutes, long enough for him to change, pour a glass of wine, and settle onto the couch with his phone. I watched him scroll, probably texting Scarlett, completely oblivious. Then, I walked over with his laptop, already open to that hidden folder. I sat down in the armchair across from him, the coffee table between us like a barrier. I turned the screen so he could see it clearly. What is this? I asked, the simplest question I could formulate. Mason looked up, confusion crossing his face. Then, I watched recognition hit him. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For 3 seconds, panic flashed across his features, raw and unguarded. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder. His expression shifted to defensiveness. You went through my private files? His voice rose with indignation, as if I were the one who'd committed an unforgivable violation. Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right to snoop through my laptop. The audacity of it stunned me. He wasn't denying. He wasn't apologizing. His first instinct was to make me the villain. I was using your laptop because mine crashed during a work deadline, I said, my voice calm and level. I needed to access our tax documents. I found a folder labeled private that contained evidence of a years-long emotional affair with Scarlett. So yes, I looked. And now I'm asking you to explain it. Mason set down his wine glass with force. There's nothing to explain. You're misinterpreting a friendship because you've never been able to handle me being close with Scarlett. This is exactly the kind of jealous behavior I've been trying to be patient with for months. I felt something cold settle in my chest. He was actually going to try to gaslight me, with the evidence sitting between us on his laptop screen. Mason, I read the text messages. I saw the photos from your secret Tuesday lunch dates. I found the credit card charges at Riverbend Cafe, every single week for 2 years. This isn't me misinterpreting friendship. This is you having an emotional affair and lying about it. It's not an affair. Mason stood up, pacing, his voice taking on that exasperated tone he used when explaining something he thought should be obvious. Scarlett and I are close friends. We have been since college. Yes, we talk about deep things. Yes, we meet for lunch regularly. That's what real friendship looks like, Arya. Deep connection, emotional honesty, mutual support. Just because you don't have friendships like that doesn't mean they're inappropriate. Every sentence was a carefully constructed deflection, reframing his betrayal as my inadequacy. I'd heard these tactics before, but never so blatantly. Never while hard evidence sat between us. She texted you at 2 o'clock in the morning asking if you ever thought about what life would have been like if you'd gotten together instead of staying friends. I said, my voice harder now. You responded that you thought about it more than you probably should. That's not friendship, Mason. That's emotional infidelity. You're twisting things. He stopped pacing, taking private conversations out of context and building some narrative in your head because you're insecure about my friendships. Scarlett and I talk about hypothetical scenarios sometimes. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. The argument raged for 2 hours, circling the same points. Mason deflecting, reframing every piece of evidence I presented. He had an explanation for everything. The late-night texts were just friends supporting each other. The secret lunch dates were regular catch-ups he didn't mention because he knew I'd react badly. The intimate conversations were normal for people with history. Every time I pointed out how his behavior crossed boundaries, he countered that I was the one with the problem. Too jealous, too possessive, too insecure. I was exhausted. My head hurt from the circular logic, but I kept pushing. I needed him to acknowledge the truth, to stop lying, to take responsibility. That's when Mason delivered the statement that would seal the fate of our marriage. He stood in the middle of our living room, arms crossed, jaw set. His voice took on that patronizing tone I'd come to recognize. If anything, Arya, you owe Scarlett an apology. The words hung in the air. I stared at him, genuinely shocked into silence. She has been nothing but kind to you over the years, Mason continued, warming to his argument. She's tried to include you, tried to be friendly, and you've treated her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. She knows you don't like her. She's told me it hurts her feelings how you act around her, how you always try to limit our friendship. He was actually doing this. He was making his emotional affair partner the victim, and me, the aggressor who needed to apologize. You want me to apologize to her? My voice was oddly calm, despite the rage building inside me. For what exactly? For noticing that my husband was having an emotional affair? For being uncomfortable with inappropriate boundaries? For trusting my instincts when you spent months trying to convince me they were wrong? For being jealous and possessive and unable to handle me having close friendships? Mason's voice rose. For making Scarlett feel unwelcome and judged when she's done nothing wrong. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I seriously need to reconsider this marriage. The room went absolutely silent. Mason stood there, arms crossed, expression set, clearly believing he held all the power. He thought he was calling my bluff, forcing me to choose between my pride and my marriage. He had no idea what he'd just done. Something shifted inside me in that silence. Cold. Clear. Absolutely certain. I looked at my husband, this man who was demanding I apologize to his emotional affair partner for the crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship, and realized he had just handed me the perfect weapon. If Mason wanted an apology, he would get one. Just not the kind he was expecting. I let the silence stretch, watching him in his self-righteous certainty. Then I spoke, in a voice much calmer than I felt. Fine. Mason's expression shifted to surprise. He'd clearly expected more argument. I'll apologize to Scarlett. I continued, my tone completely reasonable. But let's do it properly. At her house. With Elijah there, too. If I'm going to apologize for hurting her feelings, I want to do it right. In front of both of our spouses, so everyone can hear what I have to say. Mason's face lit up with relief, and something disturbingly like triumph. He actually smiled. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully broken me into compliance. Really? You'll do that? His voice was eager, pleased with himself. Absolutely, I said. Schedule it for this Saturday evening. I want to make sure everyone's there. I'll prepare what I want to say. Mason nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his phone to text Scarlett. I watched him type, watched his face relax for the first time all evening, and felt absolutely nothing but cold clarity. He had no idea what I was actually planning. No comprehension that he had just arranged the perfect stage for me to detonate the truth in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Mason spent the rest of that evening texting Scarlett, his face glowing with satisfaction. I watched him, this man who believed he just won some significant victory, and felt nothing but cold determination settling deeper into my bones. The next morning, Thursday, I woke with absolute clarity about what needed to happen before Saturday evening. Mason left for work, kissing my forehead, reminding me to think about my apology. The moment his car pulled out, I returned to his laptop. I spent 3 hours methodically documenting everything. Detailed screenshots of every damaging conversation, organized chronologically. The early messages from 3 years ago were friendly enough, then they shifted, gradually, into something deeper, more intimate, crossing boundaries in increments small enough that Mason had probably convinced himself each step was innocent. By the second year, Scarlett was texting him late at night about feeling disconnected from Elijah. Mason responded with paragraphs validating her feelings, sharing his own struggles. They started using pet names. You always know exactly what I need to hear. I don't know what I'd do without you. I organized it all by year and month, creating a timeline impossible to dismiss. Then the financial evidence. Our joint credit card statements, highlighting every Tuesday lunch charge at Riverbend Cafe for the past 2 years. Over $7,000 Mason had spent on these secret lunches, while we were supposedly saving for a house down payment. Then, something else. Buried in Mason's email inbox. Receipts for gifts he'd purchased for Scarlett. A designer silk scarf from Nordstrom for her birthday, $250. An expensive French wine for her promotion, $180. Flowers delivered to her office when she closed a major deal, $75, with a card that read, "Always knew you could do it. So proud of you." These weren't casual friend gestures. These were gifts for someone you were romantically involved with. Someone whose achievements and milestones mattered deeply. The card messages crossed every professional and platonic boundary. I printed everything, created digital backups in 3 separate cloud accounts Mason didn't have access to, saved copies to 2 different USB drives. I wasn't taking any chances. By Thursday afternoon, I had an airtight case. But I still had one more thing to do. Something that required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I needed to call Elijah Pierce. I stared at my phone for 10 minutes. Mason had his contact from double dates. I'd barely spoken to Elijah. He was quiet, reserved. But I'd seen something in his eyes lately. A resigned awareness. The same look I'd probably worn. My finger hovered. Part of me wondered if this was too far. But the part of me that had been gaslit for months knew Elijah deserved a warning. He deserved to know his world was about to change. I pressed call. "This is Elijah." His voice was professional, slightly puzzled. "Hi, Elijah. It's Arya Montgomery, Mason's wife." My voice was steady. A brief pause. "Arya, is everything okay? I'm calling because Mason has arranged for me to come to your house on Saturday evening to apologize to Scarlett. He insisted the apology happen in front of both of you, and I wanted to make sure you'd be home for it." Another, longer pause. I could almost hear him processing the layers of meaning. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. More alert. Focused. "I'll be there." No questions about what the apology was for. No confusion about why I was calling him directly. Just immediate understanding. "Thank you," I said quietly. Then, because I needed him to understand what was really happening, I added, "I think there are some things you should know. Things that have been going on that you might have suspected, but didn't have proof of." The silence was heavy with recognition. Finally, Elijah spoke, barely a whisper. "Thank you for calling me." Those 5 words carry the weight of years of suspicion. Of being told he was paranoid. Of watching his wife's attention directed elsewhere. "You deserve to know the truth," I said. "We both do." "I'll be there Saturday," he repeated. "And Arya, whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it." We hung up. I felt the weight of what I just said in motion. Elijah knew something was coming. He'd be prepared. Meanwhile, Mason came home in an excellent mood. He'd had lunch with Scarlett that day. Their regular Tuesday shifted to Thursday. He talked enthusiastically about how grateful Scarlett was, how this would clear the air, strengthen all of our relationships. I nodded and smiled, reviewing my compiled evidence. Friday was more of the same. Mason coached me repeatedly on what to say during the apology. Bullet points on his phone. Acknowledge my jealousy. Admit I'd misinterpreted their friendship. Thank Scarlett for her patience. Express gratitude. He even suggested an expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering. "Really show her you're serious," he'd said. I agreed to everything. I practiced the humble facial expressions. Asked clarifying questions about tone and body language to make him believe I was genuinely preparing his apology. With each coaching session, his confidence grew. He actually hugged me that evening, saying he was proud of me for being mature enough to work through my issues. I hugged him back, feeling the unfamiliar weight of deliberate deception. I'd never been good at lying, but something had shifted inside me. I'd learned from the master. That night, I lay next to Mason, listening to him breathe peacefully, completely unaware that tomorrow would detonate his carefully constructed world. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind circled through what I was planning. Was I becoming vindictive? Was public humiliation the answer? Did Elijah deserve to have his marriage destroyed in front of witnesses? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Mason's face illuminated by his phone screen at our anniversary dinner. The disappointed looks he'd given me. The patient, patronizing tone. The way he'd made me question my own sanity while maintaining a hidden emotional affair that proved I'd been right all along. I thought about all the women who stay silent because speaking truth makes others uncomfortable, who apologize for being right, who shoulder blame for other people's betrayals. And I realized what I was planning wasn't petty revenge. It was justice, clarity, and the kind of truth-telling that shatters comfortable lies people have been living in for too long. When dawn finally broke, painting the walls with pale gold light, I got up with absolute certainty. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready to deliver the apology Mason had demanded, just not the one he'd scripted. Saturday arrived. I spent the morning moving through our apartment like someone preparing for battle. Mason interpreted my quiet focus as nervousness. He kept reassuring me. I let him believe whatever he needed to believe. By 5 p.m., I was dressed in a simple navy dress, respectful, understated. Mason had picked out the expensive wine. He wrapped it carefully, treating it like some peace offering that would seal our reconciliation. We left at 6:15 for the 25-minute drive to Scarlett and Elijah's house. Mason insisted we take his car, a united front. He drove, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally patting my knee. He talked the entire drive about how meaningful this was, how proud he was of me, how our marriage would be so much stronger. I watched suburban streets slide past, normal, ordinary lives unfolding. None of them had any idea that in one of those similar houses, for lives were about to detonate. Mason kept glancing at me, a hopeful expression mixed with nervousness. He wondered if I'd back out, embarrass him. I gave him nothing. My expression was neutral, maybe slightly anxious. I held the wine bag. I nodded when he talked. I smiled when he squeezed my knee. I was the picture of a contrite wife, ready to make amends. When we pulled up to Scarlett and Elijah's house at 6:40, all the interior lights blazed. Through the windows, I could see Scarlett arranging something on their coffee table. She'd gone to effort for this, setting the stage for what she believed would be her validation and my public submission. Mason parked, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment. Then he turned to me with genuine emotion. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but this means everything to me, Arya. Everything. Our marriage is going to be so much stronger after tonight. You'll see." I looked at my husband, this man who had gaslit me for months, who had demanded I apologize to his affair partner. "I know it will," I said, and squeezed his hand back. That was the last moment Mason would look at me with trust or affection. He didn't know it yet. We walked to the front door, Mason carrying the wine. Scarlett opened it before the chime finished, her smile wide, barely concealing her smugness. She looked perfect, of course. Designer jeans, silk blouse, flawless makeup. She dressed for this, like someone expecting to be photographed for a magazine spread on Gracious Living. "Mason! Arya! Come in." Her voice was warm, welcoming. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Really, clearing the air will be good for all of us." Mason handed her the wine. She made appreciative noises, then set it aside, focused on me. Studying my face, my body language, trying to gauge how thoroughly Mason had broken me. Elijah appeared from the kitchen. The moment our eyes met, I saw everything I needed to know. He was alert, watchful, braced for impact. His expression had none of the resigned exhaustion I'd seen before. He knew something significant was about to happen. And unlike Mason and Scarlett, he was prepared for it to be uncomfortable. "Arya! Mason!" He nodded to both of us, his voice neutral. Then his eyes found mine again, for just a fraction of a second, and I saw acknowledgement, recognition, maybe even gratitude. We moved into the living room. Scarlett and Elijah settled onto their gray sectional. Mason and I took matching armchairs across from them, a glass coffee table creating a barrier. The table held wine glasses, a carefully arranged cheese board. Scarlett had clearly staged the scene, creating the perfect setting for receiving an apology that would validate years of boundary violations. The room felt theatrical, like we were actors who'd been given scripts. Except only I knew what the real plot was about to be. Mason settled into his chair, giving me an encouraging nod. His expression radiated excitement mixed with relief. He thought he'd won. Scarlett folded her hands in her lap with gracious expectation, her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged into magnanimous forgiveness. She was ready to receive my contrition. Elijah leaned back, arms crossed, watching with focused intensity. He was the only person in that room, besides me, who understood that something was about to shift. I took a deliberate breath, set my wine glass down. The sound of glass meeting would seem unnaturally loud in the expectant silence. I looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze, and began speaking in a voice that was calm, measured, and gave nothing away. "Scarlett, I want to start by saying that Mason was absolutely right." I paused, letting those words settle. Her smile widened slightly with validation. "I do owe you an apology. Another pause. Scarlett's posture relaxed fractionally. Mason's face lit up with relief. Elijah's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. But not for the reasons you think. The atmosphere in that living room shifted so dramatically, I could almost feel the air pressure change. Mason's encouraging smile faltered, froze on his face. Scarlett's expression transformed from gracious acceptance to cautious uncertainty. Elijah leaned forward, his full attention locked on me now, every muscle alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice, not raising my volume, not changing my tone, just speaking truth with the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up years ago. I apologize for allowing you and Mason to continue an emotional affair right under my nose while convincing myself I was the crazy one for feeling uncomfortable. Mason tried to interrupt, his voice sharp with warning. Arya, what are you? I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence without even looking at him. My eyes stayed locked on Scarlett's face, watching her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. Let me finish. You demanded an apology. I'm giving you one. Then I turned my attention to Elijah, whose face had gone completely still. I pulled out my phone, with hands that were steady despite everything, opened the folder I'd so carefully organized, and began speaking in that same measured tone. I apologized to Elijah, actually, because he deserved to know the truth about his wife long before tonight. For the past 3 years, Mason and Scarlett have been meeting every Tuesday for secret lunch dates at Riverbend Cafe. They've been having late-night text conversations about alternative life choices they wish they'd made together, about intimate regrets and emotional connections that cross every boundary a married person should respect. I handed my phone directly to Elijah, watching his face as he took it with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the first message, then scrolling. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like he might be sick. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Mason was on his feet now, his voice rising with panic. Elijah, don't listen to this. She's taking things completely out of context. You know how Arya gets about my friendship with Scarlett. She's always been jealous, and now she's trying to destroy. How long? Elijah's voice cut through Mason's explanation like a blade through paper. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. The coldness in those 2 words silenced everything else. He was still looking at my phone, still scrolling, but his question was directed at Scarlett with absolute precision. The room fell into a silence, so complete I could hear someone's watch ticking. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed. Her perfectly composed expression had cracked completely. Tears formed in her carefully made-up eyes. She tried the reflexive denial first, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mason and I are just close friends. We've always been close. There's nothing physical between us. Nothing inappropriate has actually happened. Elijah finally looked up from my phone, and the expression on his face made even me take a step back. It wasn't rage, not exactly, though that was there. It was something colder, more devastating. Recognition, vindication, years of suppressed suspicion, finally given permission to surface. I didn't ask if you slept with him, Elijah said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of fury that was more frightening than shouting would have been. I asked how long you've been having an emotional affair with Mason while making me feel crazy for noticing. The parallel to my own experience was so perfect it felt orchestrated. We had both been living the same nightmare of gaslighting and manipulation, just from different angles. Both told we were paranoid or insecure. Both made to feel like the problem while our spouses maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of us. Scarlett's facade shattered completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks, ruining her makeup. Elijah, please. You're misunderstanding. We never meant for anything to. 3 years. Elijah's voice was flat now, reading from the timestamps on my phone. According to these messages, this has been going on for at least 3 years. 3 years of secret lunches. 3 years of late-night conversations about regretting your life choices. 3 years of you telling him things you never told me. He scrolled further, his jaw tightening. Here's one from 8 months ago, where Scarlett asks Mason if he ever thinks about what life would have been like if he'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And Mason responds that he thinks about it more than he probably should. Mason found his voice again, but instead of apologizing, he went straight into damage control. He was standing now, face flushed with anger and humiliation, pointing at me like I was the one who had committed some unforgivable betrayal. Arya, you're destroying everything. This isn't what I meant when I asked you to apologize. You twisted what I asked you to do. You've taken private conversations completely out of context, and you're using them as weapons to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with desperation, trying to reframe my truth-telling as manipulation or revenge. He turned to Elijah, palms up, placating. Look, Elijah, you have to understand. Scarlett and I have been close friends since college. We have history together. Yes, maybe we talk more than typical friends do. Maybe we're more emotionally connected than some people might think is appropriate, but nothing physical has ever happened between us. We've never crossed that line. Arya's jealousy has blown a close friendship completely out of proportion. But Elijah wasn't listening to Mason's revised narrative. He was still scrolling through my phone, reading message after message where Mason and Scarlett crossed boundaries no amount of explanation could justify. His expression grew colder, more closed. It says here, you bought her a designer scarf for her birthday, Elijah said quietly, reading from the email receipts I'd included. $250. And expensive wine for her promotion. Flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Scarlett. You told me those flowers were from a grateful client. Scarlett's tears were flowing freely now. Elijah, I can explain how much money has Mason spent on you over the past 3 years. Elijah cut her off. While telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget? Mason's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart in real time. The evidence spoke louder than his deflections. Elijah trusted facts over explanations. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress, picking up my purse. Mason continued his desperate explanations to an audience that had stopped listening. The time had come for me to leave, to walk away from the explosion I detonated and let it burn through whatever was left. I looked at Mason directly, meeting his eyes for what would probably be the last time with any intimacy or connection. You demanded I apologize for speaking truth. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah. Done. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Mason, consider this my answer to that threat. Then I turned to Elijah, whose expression had shifted to something complex, painful gratitude mixed with devastation. Anger at the betrayal, mixed with relief at finally having proof that he wasn't crazy. I've sent you copies of everything to your email address. All the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need to make informed decisions about your marriage. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Mason grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight enough to hurt, fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. His voice had shifted from angry to pleading. You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this. Arya, please. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down and be reasonable. I pulled my arm free with more force than I'd intended, leaving red marks where his fingers had been. I met his eyes one final time. No, Mason. You need to talk to your lawyer. Because I'm done being the understanding wife in a 3-person marriage where I was always the least important person. I walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Scarlett sobbing, her composure completely destroyed. I could hear Elijah's cold questions continuing, his voice controlled, but carrying that undercurrent of fury. I could hear Mason's increasingly desperate attempts to explain, to justify, to salvage something. But none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the cool October evening air and closed the door behind me, muffling the sounds of their imploding marriages. The suburban street was quiet, peaceful, completely at odds with the devastation I'd just left behind. I pulled out my phone, shaking, and called for a rideshare. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for the devastation I'd caused. I destroyed my own marriage, yes, but I'd also destroyed Scarlett and Elijah's. I'd humiliated Mason and Scarlett publicly. I'd handed Elijah information that would likely haunt him for years. But mostly I felt relieved, like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me for so long. When the rideshare dropped me off, I walked through the lobby and up to our floor feeling like I was moving through a different world. I unlocked our door and stepped inside. The space felt different. Lighter somehow. Less suffocating. Mason's things were everywhere, but they felt temporary now, like artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on our couch, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. I sat there, nursing my wine, waiting. Part of me wondered if Mason would come home at all that night, but a deeper instinct told me he'd come back, if only to try one more time to control the narrative. His key turned in the lock at 1:47 a.m. The man who entered our apartment looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left it just 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen. His hair was messed, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like someone who'd aged a decade in an evening. He stood in the doorway, staring at me, then closed the door with careful control. He walked into the living room, a look on his face I'd never seen before. Devastation, fury, grief, rage. All competing. How could you do that? His voice was raw, scraped clean of its usual confident tone. How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship? Share private conversations that you had no right to see in the first place? I took another sip of wine. Said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Scarlett's house. Now it was Mason's turn to deal with consequences. He started pacing. You violated my privacy. You went through my personal files, read my private messages, and then you weaponized them to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship. This was the anger phase. I recognized it from articles about how people respond to being caught in affairs. Deny. Deflect. Attack. Make the person who discovered the betrayal the villain. I let him rant for 20 minutes. Then he shifted. Sat down on the armchair, elbows on knees, hands clasped. A posture of vulnerability. Look, I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice softer now. Maybe Scarlett and I got too close. Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries. But we can work through this, Arya. We can go to couples therapy. I'll put distance between myself and Scarlett. Whatever you need. Our marriage is worth fighting for. This was the bargaining phase. Promising change. Offering concessions. Trying to negotiate a path forward that would minimize his losses. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. Mason, I'm filing for divorce. His face went through another rapid evolution. Shock first. Then calculation. Then manipulation, his features arranging themselves into wounded confusion. You're overreacting, he said, that patronizing tone returning. You're emotional right now, understandably. But destroying our marriage over a friendship that you misinterpreted isn't the answer. You're letting your insecurities ruin something good. This is exactly what I was trying to help you work through. Even now, even caught with irrefutable evidence. Mason was trying to make this my failing. My insecurity. My misinterpretation. My inability to handle mature adult relationships. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word, closing and locking the door behind me. I heard him call after me, try the door handle. Heard him pace the living room for another hour. Around 2 a.m., I heard him finally settle on the couch, probably too exhausted to keep performing. The next morning, he tried yet another approach, the wounded husband who just wanted to save his marriage. He called in sick, spent the day following me around, trying to initiate conversations about rebuilding trust. But I was done. Done fighting. Done explaining. Done accepting blame for other people's betrayals. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I detonated our lies at Scarlett's house, I called Victoria Brennan. A colleague had recommended her. Victoria had a reputation for being thorough, uncompromising, and completely unsympathetic to spouses who tried to manipulate proceedings through gaslighting and blame-shifting. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. I showed her everything. The screenshots, the credit card statements, the photos, the email receipts. Victoria reviewed each piece with focused intensity. When she finished, she sat back. Emotional affairs are harder to prove than physical ones in divorce proceedings, she said. But the documentation you've compiled is exceptionally comprehensive. This shows a clear pattern of deception spanning years, financial evidence of resources being diverted outside the marriage, and communication that crosses appropriate boundaries. We can absolutely use this. She laid out her strategy. File for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct based on emotional infidelity. Push for a favorable settlement. He'll try to make you the villain, Victoria said with confidence. He'll claim you're jealous, vindictive. Don't let him. The evidence speaks for itself. I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks later, I received an email that surprised me. The sender was Elijah Pierce. Subject line, "Thank you." I opened it. He'd filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. Armed with the evidence I'd provided, it was impossible for Scarlett to deny or minimize. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime, carefully clarifying it wasn't romantic. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be the third priority in your own marriage, to be gaslit into doubting your own perceptions. I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Elijah looked different. The resigned exhaustion was gone, replaced by something more solid. Our conversation flowed easily. No pretense. We'd both seen each other at our worst. He told me about years of watching Scarlett's face light up when Mason called, of being told he was too sensitive. It was like listening to my own experiences reflected back at me. We'd been living parallel nightmares, both manipulated by people who claimed to love us while prioritizing their emotional affair. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned that Mason and Scarlett tried to make a real relationship work. The predictability of it was almost funny. Once their connection was no longer forbidden, once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of stolen emotional moments, the fantasy collapsed under the weight of mundane reality. They lasted exactly 4 months. Scarlett struggled with Mason's financial situation after the divorce. Mason discovered Scarlett's constant need for attention, which had seemed endearing from a distance, became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility. The relationship that had seemed so special and deep when conducted through texts and secret lunches turned out to be mostly illusion. They broke up quietly, a sad fizzle that proved what I'd suspected. What they had wasn't love. It was the thrill of emotional affairs and the validation of being someone's secret priority. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night, I sat in Victoria's office, signing the final divorce papers. Victoria had negotiated a settlement more favorable than I'd expected. Mason agreed to split our savings evenly, let me keep the apartment, even pay half my legal fees. Victoria suspected his unusual generosity stemmed from wanting to end proceedings quickly before more details of his relationship with Scarlett became public record. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Arya Montgomery. Each signature felt like closing a door I'd been trying to shut for months, but kept getting wedged open by Mason's attempts at manipulation. When I signed the last page, Victoria smiled. "Congratulations, you're officially divorced." I shook her hand, gathered my paperwork, and walked out. I'd expected this moment to feel heavier, sadder. I'd expected at least some echo of grief for the marriage I believed in. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd finally removed a heavy winter coat I'd been wearing for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, warmer on my skin, carrying the kind of promise that comes with genuine new beginnings. My weekly coffee meetings with Elijah had continued throughout the divorce proceedings. What started as mutual support between two people who'd survived similar betrayals gradually evolved into something more complicated. We talked less about past pain and more about present lives, future possibilities. We discovered shared interests: old black and white films, difficult hiking trails, quiet mornings. One Wednesday afternoon, Elijah suggested dinner instead of coffee. His voice carried a hint of nervousness I found endearing. "There's a new Italian place downtown," he said. "I thought maybe we could try it together if you're interested." I looked at this quiet man who'd survived the same betrayal. We were both gun-shy, both carrying damage. But we'd built something honest between us over these months. A foundation based on truth instead of illusion. "I'd like that," I said. "We're taking things slowly." Trust rebuilds gradually, but the foundation feels different this time. Solid in ways my marriage to Mason never had been. I ran into Mason unexpectedly about 8 months after our divorce was finalized. Grocery store, produce section. We both reached for the same bag of organic apples. We pulled back, started to apologize, then recognized each other. He looked older, more worn. New lines around his eyes. More gray in his hair. He'd lost weight, not in a healthy way. "Arya," he said finally. "How are you?" I kept my answer simple. "I'm good, working on interesting design projects, enjoying the apartment, building a life that feels right." He nodded, something that might have been genuine happiness crossing his face. "I'm glad you're doing well." He looked like he wanted to say something more significant, wrestling with words. Finally, he spoke quietly. "I made mistakes. A lot of them. I handled our marriage poorly. I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth about my relationship with Scarlett." The apology was real. I could hear that, but it came far too late. Some things can't be unsaid. Some damage can't be undone. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt nothing beyond that. No anger anymore, no hurt. Just recognition that this was a person I used to know who taught me important lessons about boundaries and self-trust. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. A pause. Then I asked, because some part of me was curious, "How's Scarlett?" Mason's expression closed off immediately. His face shut down. "We broke up months ago." Turns out what we had didn't translate well into an actual relationship. Once it wasn't secret anymore. He laughed, without humor. "I'm living in a studio apartment across town, working through my own process of figuring out who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining." We parted cordially, both of us aware that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. They can only be acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us into whoever we become next. Today, I live in an apartment that no longer carries any trace of Mason or our marriage. I redecorated completely, erasing visual reminders, replacing them with choices that reflect only my taste. The bookshelves hold novels I want to read. The walls feature artwork that speaks to me. The furniture is arranged for my comfort. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. The sound of a life reclaimed, of boundaries respected, of truth spoken without apology. Elijah and I are still taking things slow, still rebuilding trust. But what we're building feels different this time. Honest, based on respect, built between two people who understand the value of truth because we both pay the price for living in lies. I think about that night sometimes, that explosive apology that detonated multiple lives in Scarlett's carefully staged living room. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently, more privately, with less public devastation. But mostly, I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly. They need to be witnessed by everyone who's been affected by the lies. Mason wanted me to kneel and apologize for hurting Scarlett's feelings. I gave him exactly what he demanded. I just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding. Never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth. Because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie. Mason learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow for truth. I weaponized it. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of peace that comes after you finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth.